Good morning from Japan. Now Shiva or Rudra is going to teach about creation. That's what's been going on the whole time, really. He's talking to a group of princes who want to create. They want to make children. So they're seeking the power to do it in an amazing way. So and these children are related to the previous story because they're descendants from Prithu. So he teaches them kind of a song, you can call it a song or a poem that will put them in the correct frame of mind for creativity. And that's the most important thing, because the mind is the source of all of your actions. So your actions will be successful or not successful depending upon your frame of mind and your concept of what you're doing. So he went about explaining the source of creativity, the source of creation, and he says that everything emanates from consciousness. There's a singularity from which there's a big bang, and the singularity is consciousness. And he explained how it manifests itself into physical things. And then he explained that it is also being the origin of everything, the origin of all creativity. It's also the most attractive thing, the most beautiful thing is. And then he described consciousness itself as a being, a personal being that's beautiful and attractive, and he explained that. Now he starts a new section. He then returns to the practical topic that the Bracheta princes wanted to focus on: creativity and creative power. By explaining how the original being he just described is the creative origin of everything that exists. I guess this is not a different topic at all. He's just reiterating the same thing in different ways. But here it comes. It's a very, 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 very cool section. So here's his first statement for today. Yatredam vyajate vishvang vishvasmin avabhati yat tattvam brahma param jyoti akasham eva vistrutam. Yatre idam vyajate vishvan vishvasmin avabhati yat tattvam brahma param jyotir akasham iva vistrutam. So he says, he's addressing Vishnu, he's addressing Krishna, the original conscious person. He says, you are Brahman. What's Brahman? Brahman is the knowing power, the experiencing power. It's consciousness. So he says, you are Brahman, your consciousness itself, which is Param Jyoti. Tattvam Brahma, you are Brahman, Param Jyoti, and Brahman is Param Jyoti. Jyoti, you know what Jyoti is, because this is an astrology YouTube channel. So you guys probably have heard of the word Jyotisha. And why is it called Jyotisha? Because we study the lights. That's what we do. The sunlight, the moonlight. We're not studying the light itself, but we're studying the lights, the source of the lights. The stars. So Jyoti means light. And Param Jyoti means the supreme light. Why is consciousness the supreme light? Because light enables perception, right? So without light, you can't perceive visually. Consciousness is the supreme light because it doesn't just work for vision, but it works for every type of perception. It's the agency of perception. So just as light is so crucial to our existence, it's the basis of our existence. We subsist by experiencing light. That's what consciousness is. It's light. It's the supreme light. You are Brahman, the supreme light. Everything that exists is an expression of it, of Brahman. This is a really interesting statement, what he says. Everything that exists is an expression of it, and thus it shines within everything. This is a very cool statement. Yatredam vyajyate vishvam vishvasmin avabhati yat tattvam brahma paramjyoti. That you are Brahman, and that Brahman is vyajyate, emanates, or is the fountainhead for all of this. Yet idam vishvam. That Brahman is the fountainhead, the emanator of all of this, everything that exists. Idam vishvam. And therefore vishvasmin, in all of this, of a bhati, it shines in all of this. So think about this. It's very, very interesting. Everything that exists is an expression of Brahman, or consciousness, or God. Consciousness is also synonymous with God. Everything that exists is a manifestation of this, and therefore it exists in everything. Nothing exists outside of it. Nothing exists which has no relation to it. Everything that exists is some kind of part of it, or aspect of it. Thus it shines within everything. It's the supreme light that generates all things, and therefore it's shining within everything. Then at the end he said, Kashamiva Vistratam. It's like space. So he says, if you're having problem grasping the concept that everything comes from this thing, but it's in everything. If you have a concept if you have a difficulty grasping that, if it seems like a word puzzle or something, it's not really. I mean, my children come from me, and I can see myself in them as well, right? My traits, my DNA, all this stuff is in them. It's not much of a puzzle, but Shiva says, you think about space, it's just like space. Akashamiva Vistratam. Just as like space's relationship with stuff that emanated from space. So space is the origin. Space itself is indefinite, right? You can't really directly experience space. I mean, you can hear it by the effect that it has on sound waves. But space is very amorphous. Yet it causes vibration and air, and then it causes friction and fire and light to arise, and then that causes heat, which causes water to precipitate, and then that causes sediment, which causes earth to precipitate. So you get solids from space. It's the same way we're going to get solids from consciousness. We're going to get physical reality from consciousness. And everything that exists is within space, but space is within everything that exists. Space produced the earth, and inside the earth is space. If there was no space inside the earth, then you couldn't have lava in it, etc. Right? Space, out of space I can make a snowball, but there's got to be space inside the snowball too. Otherwise, where's the snow? So like that, Brahman is the source of everything, and Brahman is the essence of everything, and is the inside of everything, and it's also the container of everything that's outside of everything as well. So this is why the puzzle, it's in everything but beyond everything, is not an unreasonable puzzle at all. It's a very logical statement. Okay? Any questions about that? You are Brahman, consciousness itself, the supreme light. Everything that exists is an expression of it, and thus it shines within everything. It is similar to space, of which every physical thing is an expression and embodiment. How are we doing here in our comprehension, in our digestion of this? Nice to see all the friendly names. Nice, Alf. Let's see what Shiva says next. We'll cover not that many verses today, but we'll look at them in a little more slowly detail. Yo ma yayedam pururu bayasrijat bibharti puya kshapayatya vikriya yad bheda buddhi sadivatma dushtaya tam atmatantram bhagavan pratimahi. So his topic remains on Brahman. He's explaining Brahman. He says Brahman, which is consciousness itself, is unchanging and unalterable. Yet it's the power from which multitudes of changing forms pour forth, are sustained, and are dissolved. These forms can confuse and fragment our identities, or they can establish and express it. I want to comprehend all these forms in relation to you, Bhagavan, and establish my identity in that way. So here he says this Brahman, which is consciousness itself, right? It's avikriya. Kind of like space is, physically speaking, you can't see it, you don't interact with it, you're just in it. And it's just the basis of everything. Similarly, Brahman is avikriya. It's consciousness. It's not doing anything, but it's the experiencer of everything. So avikriya means it's unchanging and it doesn't get altered. It doesn't get affected by any activity, or it doesn't really do any activity. Yet, everything that exists, he just said, was an expression of it. It comes from it. It's the fountainhead of everything. So here he's giving another kind of riddle or conundrum, that here's a substance which doesn't do anything and isn't affected by any activity, avikriya, yet it's the origin of all activities and effects. And he says the reason why it is so is because it has maya, which is power. People throw the word maya around and they think that it means illusion. It doesn't mean illusion. I'm sorry to say, it means power. Power also means magic. Magic also can imply illusion. But Brahman has maya, or power. And it's because of that power, and it's this power of Brahman, which is vikriya, which has actions, which performs action. Yomayedam pururupa, this, many, many, many forms. Rupa is forms. Visible, definite things. Pururupa, asrijat, the same word, asrijat, from the previous statement, like being the fountainhead of, or being it's flowing out from this thing. Many forms flow out from the maya, the power of Brahman. Yomayed idam pururupayashrajat. So consciousness has power. What is the power of consciousness? Perception. And that perception is the fountainhead of all things which can be perceived, which is rupa. Things that have form. And it's not going to produce one rupa. It's going to produce many, 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 many rupa. Puru rupa, multitudes of rupa. Yo maya yedam puru rupa yasrajat. Bibharti bhuya. Kshapayati vikriya. It's going to produce the things. It's going to keep the things existing. And it's also going to erase the things. Produce is asrajat. Bibharti is hold it up, keep it up. And kshapa is delete it, erase it. It's consciousness. It has a power to experience. The power to experience has a want to experience. So it puts something into being which can be experienced, and then it holds it in being, bibharti, to experience it, and then it says, I want a new thing. So it deletes the old thing, puts up a new thing. Yo maya yedam pururupa yasrajat bibharti bhuya kshapayati vikriya. Yad beda buddhi. Now this next part's very cool too. Yad beda buddhi. This can cause our buddhi, our intellect, to become fractured or fragmented. Yad beda buddhi. Sat ivatma tushtaya. The atmas can become confused, dushtaya, by this fragmentation of their thought. Yet beda buddhi, what's the word? Next word? Sat. Yet beda buddhi sat ivatma dushtaya. Even though the atma is sat and real, it can get confused and fragmented by its experience of multiple fragmented forms. But it's called sympathy or empathy or projection. Consciousness, the power of experience has the effect of putting you into the experience or uniting you with the object which is experienced. So you feel that you unite with the object of experience by experiencing it. So the Atma becomes confused. The Atma or the self or the individual becomes confused. The sense of identity gets confused by the fact that it's experienced itself in multiple forms. It gets confused about what its own form is. So these forms can confuse and fragment our identities, or from Atma Tantram, or it can establish our identity. So this is really, really important. This is great stuff. This is what Bhagavatam is like. Hey, Waylon, this is why Bhagavatam is really, really, really irreplaceable as the most amazing book of philosophy to study. So it's explaining the origin of everything is Brahman, which is consciousness itself. Consciousness itself has a certain maya, or power, which is to express consciousness, to be conscious, to experience things. That power that it has to experience things is the origin of the things that get experienced. It manifests the things to experience. It manifests them, it keeps them existing, and it also gets rid of them when it doesn't want them anymore. The effect that that has on consciousness can be on either pole. It can confuse the identity or it can establish the identity. By expressing yourself in a tangible form, you express, clarify, define, and make strong what you are. If you have a feeling and you never put it in words, or you never show it in your expression, or you never do anything about it, then it's just a feeling and you're not even sure what it is. If you have an idea or a concept or a philosophy or an opinion about something and you never explain it to anybody, or you never diagram it, or you never put it into concrete form and show people what it is, then you yourself are not really so sure what it is. When you try to put it into a concrete form and explain it and put it in words or explain it and draw a picture of it, then you can have two effects may happen. You may get confused about it yourself. Or you may establish it clearly and definitely exactly what it is. In the same way, consciousness, by exhibiting forms, can get confused about its identity, or it can express it. The word tantra means the technology of, or the tool of. So if you say Atma Tantra, it means this is the technology of the Atma. This is the way of defining the Atma. The Atma is expressed and defined and made solid and real by the forms that it generates, maintains, and changes. So, or the word Atma Dushta means the Atma gets confused and falls into Beda Bhuti, having fragmented sense of self. By thinking this form, that form, the other form, which one is me? So what's the difference? So if you look at a movie, and you have frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5 in the movie, and the movie plays, nobody except the most severely autistic person would get confused by the change of frames, right? You realize the continuity that's changing between the frames. The person is just walking, they're moving. There's a continuity between the change of frames. You can see the connection between one to the next. You don't get confused. You maintain a sense of identity through the changing frames. But if you have a problem with that, if you just take, for example, if you separate the frames too far, if you take 4 frames of a movie and you put them really far apart, it'll be confusing. It'll seem like they're 4 different scenes. So that's an analogy to explain that consciousness manifests many, many forms. If they have no continuity or uniting factor to them, then it destroys the consistency of the individual, or it confuses it. But if they have the uniting thread through them, then it establishes the individual in a concrete manner. Hence, Ruchira just recently said in the chat, Sutra Maniganaiva, like pearls strung upon a thread. Seeing the thread behind the pearls in the pearl necklace, it's what holds the necklace together. Let's see if you have any questions about this. It's very interesting. Atma Tantra, and right, Ruchira, so, my God, my eyes. Oh my God, do I have a slow chat on? I need to turn it on. How do I do it? I'll do it next time, okay? I won't forget. Spacebug, go back to the original streams. They're all on my channel. You can find out any of that basic info about the Bhagavatam itself. Yellow Crystal Warrior, when these forms decay, does our identity stay intact in the next form? See, that's what Shiva answered about that. Good question. All right, let's continue on. So, right, I actually didn't finish it up. Bhagavan Pratimahi, then Shiva finishes it up by saying, what's the thread, the uniting force between all of the manifestations of the specific forms of consciousness? That's Bhagavan, the original conscious entity. So he says, Tvam Atma Tantram Bhagavan Pratimahi. What I want to get is to establish myself, to establish my identity by seeing by knowing, experiencing all of these forms as manifestations of one thing, Bhagavan, the original conscious entity. All right, so I'll redo the English on the two statements that we looked at so far, and then we'll go and look at the next statement. What we've said so far is you are Brahman, consciousness itself, the supreme light. Everything that exists is an expression of it, and thus it shines within everything. It is similar to space, of which every physical thing is an expression and embodiment. Brahman, consciousness itself, is unchanging and unalterable, yet it is the power from which multitudes of changing forms pour forth, are sustained and dissolved. These forms can confuse and fragment our identities, or they can establish and express it. I want to comprehend all these forms in relationship to you, Bhagavan, and establish my identity in that way. Now, his next statement. Kriya kalapair idameva yoginaha shraddhanvita sadhu yajanti siddhaye bhutendriyanta karanopalakshtam vede chitantre chata eva kovidaha. Those who are wise and expert have techniques and conceptions that allow them to utilize the things manifest by Brahman, physical things, and the internal and external tools for interacting with them as indirect forms of you. Thus, they can wholeheartedly and expertly engage with you through their actions and thoughts in a wonderful way that yields the perfection I seek. So he said, I want to establish my identity related to you by understanding all of the forms that you manifest in relationship to you. And then in this verse he says, there's systems for that. Those systems are called yogas. There's yogas for that. There's Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga. So there's people who are Kovid. Kovid means they have a lot of vit. They have a lot of knowledge. They're experts. They have Veda and Tantra. They have philosophy and techniques. They have concepts and technologies. For Kriya and Kalpa, to perform actions or to have conceptions about idam, about all these things that have come from you, with yoga, yogina, that are linked with you. They can use their bhuta, indriya, and antakarana, which means they can use all their actual body and the external world. They can use their senses and they can use their feelings and thoughts as upalakshita, indirect forms of you. And thus they can engage in life with shraddha, with their hearts wholeheartedly. And they can yajanti, they can strive for the siddha, the perfection that I wanted. Make sense? It's a very good statement too. Any questions on that? What if you have multiple personalities? If you have multiple personalities, you're Beta Bhuta. An Atma Dushtaya. That's true. I mean, what if you have multiple personalities? Welcome to the club. Everyone has multiple personalities. It's just if you're identified by a psychologist as having multiple personalities, it means right now at the same time. So it's just a little bit worse. Karma, you do have to solidify. See, this is what I should have said before. The physical manifestations of consciousness can either crack it and diffuse it, or can make it real. People will say, look, I have multiple personalities, or look, we get confused and and put off course by all of these different forms and names of things that we chase. So let's get rid of all the names and forms. Let's not put our ideas into concrete form. Let's not prove them by math. Let's not prove them by logic. And then what will you end up with then? Nothing. You end up with just your vague, amorphous consciousness itself, idea itself, feeling itself. Consciousness wants to experience, that's its Maya, its power. You want to do it right. So no, it's not incorrect that we try to if Einstein says nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, he better be able to show me the math that proves it. If he can show me the math, if he can make it real and tangible, then his concept is not just anymore somebody's opinion or a thought. It's concrete. If you want to tell me I'm a nice guy, then do something nice. Make it concrete. If you say, I'm very good at tennis, then show me your tennis. If you just say, no, if I show you my tennis, then it'll just be confusing. Better if we don't do anything, but just you should know I'm good at tennis. Well, that's meaningless. So similarly, God has form and name and color and shape. You can't just say, well, because colors, shapes, names, and forms distract consciousness from what it truly is. They distract consciousness from what it truly is if they are approached in the wrong way. But if they're approached in the right way, Covid, Atma, with the Tantra and the Veda and Yoga, then they establish what you really are. So Rudra is making the point now that the things that we have in this world right now, they can make us more and more confused and distant from Bhagavan, or they can make us more and more clear and enlightened and connected with Bhagavan, depending on whether we approach them with Tantra and Veda or without Tantra and Veda. So Spacebug, you just said creation was restricted in form when it was given name. No, that's exactly what is not the truth. It can be restricted by giving name and form, or it can be established by giving name and form. If you don't give name and form to something, it's amorphous, which is the biggest restriction. It has no reality or tangibility to it. If you give it the wrong name and form, then it gets fragmented or confusing. But if you give it the correct name and form, then it gets established. Yeah, this exactly, Kate. So some spiritualists will say, therefore we shouldn't have any imagery, but that's ridiculous. Okay, then I will now repeat the three things that Rudra has said so far in English, and then we'll look at the next one in Sanskrit and talk about it. So far he has said, you are Brahman, consciousness itself, which is the supreme light. Everything that exists is an expression of it, and thus it shines within everything. It is similar to space, of which every physical thing is an expression and embodiment. Brahman, consciousness itself, is unchanging and unalterable, yet is the power from which multitudes of changing forms pour forth, are sustained, and are dissolved. These forms can confuse and fragment our identities, or they can establish and express it. I want to comprehend all of these forms in relation to you, Bhagavan, and establish my identity in that way. So if it's not in relation to Bhagavan, it fragments the reality. Those who are wise and expert have techniques and conceptions which allow them to utilize the things manifest by Brahman, physical things, and the internal and external tools for interacting with them, as indirect forms of you. Thus they can wholeheartedly and expertly engage with you through their actions and thoughts in a wonderful way that yields the perfection I seek. Oh, that's it. That's all for today. After this, Rudra is going to go on and describe the sequence by which consciousness manifests tangible things. But that will be all for today. That's all that I translated. Sometimes the translation goes slower when the philosophy in the statement is very dense. Okay, friends. Thank you, Spacebook. Any other? That's it. Melissa. Go ahead, Melissa. Melissa has good, if you're interested in learning Sanskrit, Melissa has some good resources that she's going to post in the chat right now. So go, please post them. Ruchira asks, what kind of things did these experts do? All kinds of things or only spiritual ones? All kinds of things, but they do all kinds of things in a spiritual way. What's a spiritual means? In connection, spiritual means in contact with spirit. Material means divorced from spirit. So the forms which are generated by Brahman will fragment your identity when they're divorced from it. But when they're united with it, yoga, then they establish it. Okay, let's go ahead and put those resources in the chat. I'm going to split now. Thank you, everybody.